The boardroom on the 47th floor was silent, except for the sharp click of Diana Mercer's heels against Italian marble. 12 executives sat frozen as she dissected their quarterly analysis, her voice cold enough to frost the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking lower Manhattan. Numbers scrolled across the projection screen, derivatives positions that should have made sense but didn't, not to anyone willing to look past the surface polish. In the corner, a man in a faded custodial uniform paused his work on the windows and shook his head. The movement was barely perceptible, just a slight shift of disapproval, but Diana caught it. Her eyes, green and sharp as broken glass, locked onto him. The words came out like a blade being drawn. "You know finance?" The janitor looked up. His eyes were gray-blue, steady and clear, the kind of gaze that belonged to someone who'd seen things break and learned how to read the cracks before they spread. He held her stare without flinching. His voice was quiet, conversational, but it carried just enough to know you're about to lose $18 million on a 0.3% miscalculation. The room held its breath. Diana's face went pale, then flushed. She stared at this ordinary man holding a spray bottle and microfiber cloth, and something in his expression unsettled her. Intelligence that didn't belong in that uniform. Dignity that couldn't be bought or faked. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned back to her team with controlled fury. 20 minutes later, alone in her office, Diana called HR. The file arrived within the hour, and she read it twice because the first time felt like a hallucination. Ethan Cole. No, Marcus Reed. She'd misread the name in her haste. Marcus Reed, 38 years old. Education, Wharton School of Business, MBA with honors, graduated top 5% of his class. Previous employment, Horizon Capital, senior quantitative analyst, 2016 to 2021. Gap in employment, 4 years. Current position, custodial services, overnight shift. Performance reviews, exemplary. Diana leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking in the empty office. A Wharton graduate mopping floors, a senior analyst at one of the most aggressive hedge funds in New York emptying trash cans in her building. The file offered no explanation for the gap, no reference letters, nothing but a quiet fall from grace that should have been impossible in a city that worshipped credentials and pedigree. She should have let it go. She didn't. New York City stood indifferent to human drama, its glass towers reflecting nothing but their own cold beauty. Diana lived on the 47th floor in more ways than one, her world contained within conference rooms and corner offices where decisions moved markets and destroyed competitors. At 33, she'd inherited Mercer Capital Group when her father died. 5 years of proving she was more than Robert Mercer's daughter, 5 years of 16-hour days and zero tolerance for weakness. The business press called her brilliant. Her employees called her the Ice Queen, though never to her face. She called herself necessary because soft leaders didn't survive in this industry, and she'd promised herself she'd survive long enough to prove her father wrong. Robert Mercer's last words to her, delivered in a hospital room 2 weeks before the massive coronary that killed him. "You'll destroy everything I built within a year. You don't have what it takes." She kept one photograph in her office, her father shaking hands with the governor at some charity gala, both men smiling the way predators smile before the kill. She kept no mirrors because she didn't need to see herself to know what she'd become. And some mornings that was a blessing. 40 floors below, in a basement supply room that smelled of industrial bleach and floor wax, Marcus Reed changed into his work uniform. At 38, he carried himself with a weariness that had nothing to do with physical labor. His hands, scarred and calloused now, had once typed complex algorithms on Bloomberg terminals worth more than most people's houses. His eyes, still sharp despite everything, had once read market trends that made millionaires nervous and occasionally destroyed them. He'd graduated from Wharton at the top of his class, had worked at Horizon Capital where the smart money went to get smarter, had been good at his job, better than good. He'd understood markets the way some people understood music, seeing patterns in chaos, hearing rhythms in the noise of billions moving across fiber optic cables at the speed of light. Then he'd made the mistake of being honest. 3 years ago, buried in the account statements that he was paid to analyze, he'd found it. Millions in client money disappearing into offshore shells, complex derivatives used not for hedging, but for theft. Fraud so elegant it looked like genius to anyone not paying attention. He'd reported it to the SEC, believing the system worked, believing truth mattered more than loyalty to people stealing from retirees and pension funds. Instead, they destroyed him, blacklisted across every firm in Manhattan, reputation shredded by lawyers who specialized in turning whistleblowers into liars, legal fees that bled him dry, and Sarah, his wife, his light, watching their life collapse while working two jobs because they'd lost their health insurance, and she needed medication for a heart condition that wasn't serious until it was. She died on a Tuesday. Emma, no, Lily. Their daughter's name was Lily. She'd just turned 4, and Marcus had been in a deposition when his phone rang with the news that Sarah had collapsed at her second job, a retail position she'd taken to cover the gap their savings no longer filled. By the time he reached the hospital, it was over. Now he mopped floors in a building where men and women like his former self made decisions worth more than he'd earn in a lifetime. He didn't regret speaking up. He regretted that the truth had cost Sarah everything, had cost Lily a mother, had cost him the ability to look at his reflection without seeing a man who'd chosen principles over the person he loved most. Every night he went home to a one-bedroom apartment in Astoria where Lily waited with homework and stories about school. She was 8 now, bright-eyed and curious, still believing the world was fundamentally kind. He worked 3 jobs to keep that belief alive, cleaning offices for people who didn't see him, and some nights that invisibility felt like the punishment he deserved. The trading floor at 11 p.m. was empty, monitors still glowing with after-hours data from Asian markets. Marcus had learned to time his cleaning to these quiet hours when the ghosts of his former life were easier to face. He stood at a terminal someone had forgotten to lock, scanning the European derivatives positions Diana's team had been presenting that afternoon. The numbers told a story if you knew how to read it, and he'd always been good at reading. Footsteps behind him, expensive heels on commercial carpet. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Diana Mercer carried herself with a particular kind of controlled fury that you could feel before you heard it. Her voice came from directly behind him. "You're here late for a janitor." Marcus kept his eyes on the screen, the ghost of a smile touching his face. "You're here late for a CEO." She stepped beside him, following his gaze to the derivatives model. This close, he could smell her perfume, something subtle and probably worth more than his monthly rent. "I want you to look at the European hedge analysis again. My team's been stuck on it for 3 days." He finally turned to face her. She was exactly as he'd expected and nothing like he'd imagined. Beautiful in the way marble sculptures are beautiful, all sharp angles and cold perfection. But her eyes held something he hadn't seen in the boardroom, a desperate kind of exhaustion that came from caring too much and sleeping too little. The words came out before he could stop them. "You're hiring me or ordering me?" Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or recognition that he wouldn't roll over simply because she had power and he had none. $500 per session. 3 nights a week, after your daughter's asleep. The surprise must have shown on his face because she continued, "I ran a background check. Single father, 1 child, elementary school age. I don't hire people I don't understand." Marcus felt the old anger rise, the invasion of privacy, the assumption that his life was data to be analyzed. But $500 was groceries for 2 weeks, was Lily's after-school program, was the difference between surviving and drowning. His pride had already cost him everything that mattered. He couldn't afford it anymore. But he could afford one condition. "Nothing interferes with my daughter's time. Ever. If she needs me, I walk out of whatever meeting or analysis or emergency you're having, non-negotiable." Diana's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted, a flicker of respect or maybe just recognition of someone else who'd drawn their own lines in the sand. "Agreed. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Bring whatever you need to work." She turned to leave, then paused. "The calculation I was presenting this afternoon. Where exactly was the error?" Marcus pulled his worn notebook from his back pocket, flipped to a page of equations written in precise, architectural handwriting. "Your volatility coefficients are inverted. You're using historical data in a forward-looking model. In stable markets, it's close enough to work. In the current environment, you're essentially hedging backwards." He tore out the page and held it toward her. Diana took it, her fingers not quite touching his, and studied the equations. Her eyes moved across the numbers with the speed of someone who actually understood what she was reading, and Marcus revised his initial assessment. She wasn't just powerful, she was competent, which in this industry was far more dangerous. When she looked up, the ice in her expression had cracked just slightly. How long would it take your team to see this? They won't. They're looking for complex problems because complex problems make them look smart when they solve them. This is simple, just wrong. Diana folded the paper with careful precision and slipped it into her jacket pocket. 8 p.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. After she left, Marcus stood alone on the empty trading floor, surrounded by screens showing the pulse of markets that never slept, and wondered what he'd just agreed to. Working for Robert Mercer's daughter. He'd known the name was on Horizon's advisory board, had seen it in the documents he tried to use as evidence before Horizon's lawyers buried everything that mattered. He'd taken this job deliberately, wanting to understand the people who'd destroyed him, wanting to see if proximity to their world would make any of it make sense. It hadn't, but now he was being pulled back in, and the smart thing would be to refuse to stay invisible, to keep his head down and his daughter safe. $500 a night said he couldn't afford to be smart. Diana Mercer's morning routine was a military operation executed in silence. 5:30 a.m. wake-up, 45 minutes of high-intensity cycling in the building's private gym, shower, black suit, office by 6:45. No breakfast because eating alone felt too much like admission of loneliness. No phone calls because she had no one to call who wasn't paid to answer. Nina Vasquez, her assistant, arrived at 7 with espresso and the morning's crisis list. Nina had worked for Diana for 3 years and had learned not to expect pleasantries. Good morning felt like wasted syllables when there was work to be done. Diana took the coffee without looking up from her screen. The board's asking about Q3 projections? Nina's voice was carefully neutral. Blackwood called twice yesterday. He wants a meeting. David Blackwood, board chairman, 55 years old, a man who'd made his fortune in the kind of deals that looked brilliant on paper and criminal under scrutiny. He'd been her father's choice for the position, which meant Diana had spent 5 years waiting for him to make a move against her. Tell him I'll have numbers by end of week. After Nina left, Diana stood at her window overlooking the financial district, watching the sun paint the glass towers in shades of gold that would burn off by noon. Somewhere below, regular people were starting regular days, worried about regular problems like traffic and coffee and whether their kids had remembered their homework. She'd stopped being regular a long time ago, and most days she didn't miss it. But some mornings, standing in an empty office at 7 a.m. with nothing but numbers and enemies for company, she wondered what it cost to be necessary. Wondered if her father had stood at this same window, asking himself the same question, deciding the answer didn't matter because winters didn't get to be warm. Marcus walked Lily to school every morning, rain or shine, because it was 20 minutes of her undivided attention before the world got complicated. PS 112 sat on a tree-lined street in Astoria, old brick and chain-link fence, the kind of school that did its best with limited resources and teachers who actually cared. Lily chattered the whole way about her science project on weather patterns, about how cumulus clouds were different from cirrus, about how she wanted to be a meteorologist when she grew up because predicting storms seemed like useful magic. Marcus listened to every word, asked questions, made her explain the concepts until she could teach them back to him, because that was how you learn things that stuck. At the school gate, she threw her arms around his waist. Love you, Dad. Love you too, kiddo. What's the rule? If anything feels wrong, I tell Mrs. Patterson immediately, and I never go anywhere with strangers, even if they say you sent them. Perfect. What else? You're picking me up at 5:30, and we're making pasta for dinner because it's Tuesday. He kissed the top of her head, smelling the strawberry shampoo she'd insisted on last week because one of her friends used it. You're the smartest kid in New York. You say that because you're my dad. I say that because it's true. After she disappeared through the doors, Marcus stood at the fence for a moment, watching through the window as she joined her classmates. 8 years old and already more emotionally stable than he'd been at 30. Sarah's influence, still alive in Lily's kindness, in the way she assumed people were good until proven otherwise. He was raising his wife's best qualities in a city that rewarded her worst ones. and some days that felt like the only real victory he'd managed. The first consulting session started exactly at 8 p.m. Marcus arrived in his work uniform because he had to clock in at 10 and there wasn't time to go home and change. Diana didn't comment on the faded blue shirt with reeds stitched above the pocket, just gestured to the conference room where she'd set up multiple monitors showing the derivatives model. He stood beside her chair, close enough to see the screen clearly, far enough to maintain professional distance. The numbers swam across the displays, elegant and wrong, the kind of mistake that would cost millions because it looked too sophisticated to be simple error. 2 minutes of silence while he traced the data flows. Then his finger touched the screen. Here, you're mixing asset classes in the same risk bucket. Sovereign bonds and corporate derivatives don't have parallel volatility patterns. You need to stratify them, then apply different weighting coefficients to each stratum. Boo, Diana pulled up a calculation window. My team said that would take 2 weeks to recalculate. It would if you rebuilt from scratch, but if you adjust the correlation matrix first, you can use a multiplier effect. The algorithm does the heavy lifting. He pulled out his notebook, the same worn spiral he'd carried for years, and wrote out a formula. Diana input his numbers, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced speed. The model that had been spitting errors for 3 days suddenly resolved into clean, stable projections. She ran it again. Same result. The tension in her shoulders relaxed a fraction. She turned in her chair to look up at him, and Marcus saw the question forming before she asked it. Why are you cleaning floors? The old wound opened easily, familiar pain that never really scarred over. Because no one in finance will hire me. Why not? I told the truth once. Turns out, that's not valued as much as they claim in all those corporate ethics seminars. He said it without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. Diana wanted to ask more, wanted to understand how someone with his skills had ended up invisible, but his body language was clear. Door closed, subject finished. Some stories didn't get told on the first night, maybe not ever. Instead, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out an envelope with $500 in cash. This is what I promised, and I'd like to offer you a contract, 3 months consulting basis. Help my team troubleshoot their analyses. Marcus didn't take the envelope immediately. Your team won't work with a janitor. Then I'll tell them you're a specialized consultant from outside the firm, lying on my behalf. The ghost of a smile touched his face. That's not very honest, Miss Mercer. I prefer to think of it as strategic omission. And it's Diana. Miss Mercer was my grandmother. This time he did smile, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less haunted by whatever ghosts he carried. He took the envelope, tucked it into his pocket without counting it. Same condition as before. My daughter comes first. Always. Understood. After he left, Diana sat in her empty office and realized she was still smiling. She couldn't remember the last time that had happened naturally, not the practiced expression she wore for board meetings or the cold calculations she showed competitors. An actual smile, the kind that came from something other than victory. The sensation felt foreign enough to be dangerous. The whispers started within 48 hours. The CEO was bringing the janitor to meetings. At first, her senior team was merely confused. Mark Stevens, head of quantitative analysis, had built his reputation on being the smartest person in most rooms, and watching a custodian correct his work felt like professional assassination. By the third session, confusion had curdled into resentment. Marcus sat at the far end of the conference table, speaking only when asked, never volunteering opinions or pushing himself forward. But whenever he did speak, the room went quiet, and that silence was starting to feel like judgment. The breaking point came during a presentation on acquisition targets. The team proposed buying Tech Vista, a struggling software company with undervalued assets and strong intellectual property portfolio. The numbers looked solid, the analysis thorough, the opportunity clear. Diana was about to approve when she noticed Marcus frowning at his notebook. She should have ignored it. She didn't. Something wrong? Every head turned towards him. Marcus hesitated, clearly weighing whether speaking up was worth the cost. Finally, the IP portfolio they're valuing at $80 million. Half those patents expire within 18 months. After that, this company has no competitive moat. Mark pulled up the documentation, his face going pale as he scrolled through filing dates and expiration schedules. The silence stretched thin and sharp. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled fury. "He's right, we missed it." The acquisition was canceled. The meeting ended in brittle tension, team members filing out without meeting each other's eyes. Marcus helped Diana gather the documents, his movements careful and economical. Someone who'd learned to take up minimal space. His voice was quiet. "I'm making enemies for you. You're saving me from expensive mistakes." In corporate politics, that's the same thing. Diana looked at him across the conference table. This man who'd once commanded rooms like this and now entered them apologetically. The question came out before she could stop it. "Don't you get tired of being the smartest person nobody wants to listen to?" "Every day, but I got tired of being wrong more." They worked until midnight. At some point, Diana ordered food, real food, not just coffee to stay alert. Chinese takeout arrived in white paper containers, and they ate with plastic forks while debating monetary policy implications of the Federal Reserve's latest moves. Marcus made her laugh with a story about a Wharton professor who'd predicted the market wrong for 15 consecutive semesters, who'd turned his failures into a teaching method about the arrogance of certainty. Diana told him about her father, about building this company from nothing but believing she'd destroy it within a year of his death. "Sounds like you're still trying to prove him wrong." The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Every single day. Must be exhausting. It was. She'd never admitted it before, but sitting there with someone who asked for nothing and expected nothing, it felt safe to tell the truth. It is. When Marcus left that night, Diana stood at her window watching the city lights blur and sharpen as her eyes adjusted to darkness. The sensation in her chest felt strange, something warmer than satisfaction, more dangerous than accomplishment. If she had to name it, she might have called it happiness, but that seemed impossible for someone who'd forgotten how to want anything beyond winning. The pattern established itself over the next month. Marcus arrived 3 nights a week at 8 p.m., still in his work uniform, bringing his worn notebook and the kind of practical intelligence that cut through complexity like acid through silk. He never explained his past, never volunteered information about the gap in his employment, but he was generous with his knowledge in ways that suggested teaching had always been part of his nature. Diana found herself looking forward to those nights with an intensity that should have worried her. The work was good, the results measurable in money saved and opportunities identified. But it was more than that. Marcus treated her like a person instead of a position, challenged her assumptions without trying to undermine her authority, and never once looked at her with the calculation she saw in every other pair of eyes that entered her office. One evening, working late on a risk assessment, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his entire body tensed, the kind of instant alertness that came from practiced fear. He was standing before Diana could ask, "I have to go. Lily's school called. She's sick." Diana saw the panic beneath his careful control, the terror of a man who'd already lost too much. "Go, family first, always." He was halfway to the door when he stopped, turned back. "Thank you for understanding." "Of course." The next morning, a small bouquet of flowers arrived at PS 112 with a card. "Feel better soon, Diana." And she'd had Nina arrange it, which should have felt impersonal, but somehow didn't. That afternoon, Marcus sent a text, the first time they'd communicated outside of work. "Lily says thank you, and she says you're not as scary as I made you sound." Diana found herself smiling at her phone like a teenager, and the realization was alarming enough that she put the device away and didn't answer until that evening's session, when she told Marcus, "Tell Lily I'm very scary, but only to people who deserve it." She'll like that answer. She's currently writing a paper on why nice people can still be tough. Smart kid? Gets it from her mother. The comment was casual, but it was the first time Marcus had mentioned his late wife voluntarily, and Diana recognized the significance of doors being open instead of slammed shut. She didn't push, just filed the information away and returned to the spreadsheets that needed attention more than her curiosity did. But the seeds were planted, connections forming in the spaces between professional courtesy and personal interest. And Diana was smart enough to know those connections were the most dangerous kind. The intersection came on a Saturday morning, unexpected and inevitable. Marcus had a childcare emergency, the kind that happened when you were a single parent operating without a safety net. Lily's regular babysitter canceled, the backup wasn't answering, and he had a commitment to review documents Diana needed by Monday morning. He brought his daughter to the office, promising she'd be quiet, that she'd do homework in a corner and wouldn't disturb anyone. Diana arrived to find Lily Reed sitting at the conference table, 8 years old with her father's gray-blue eyes and a smile that suggested the world hadn't disappointed her yet. Coloring books and math worksheets spread around her, a small human island in the middle of high finance. The girl looked up as Diana entered. "Hi, you're Diana, right?" "That's right, and you're Lily. Dad says you're really smart and kind of scary, but you seem nice." Marcus, reviewing documents on his laptop, didn't look up. "Lily, what did we say about repeating Dad's opinions? That they're not facts, just perspectives based on limited information." Diana felt laughter bubble up, genuine and unexpected. "Your daughter sounds like a tiny philosopher. She's been reading too many books about critical thinking. It's made her insufferable." Lily threw a crayon at her father with the accuracy of long practice. "You love that I'm insufferable." Fair point. Diana found herself sitting down, pulled into the orbit of their easy affection. She helped Lily with a math problem about fractions, explained compound interest in terms simple enough for an 8-year-old to grasp, watched the girl's eyes light up with understanding. Marcus worked nearby, occasionally glancing up to make sure his daughter wasn't being too much trouble, and Diana realized this was what normal families look like. The casual intimacy of people who'd built something together instead of just existing in parallel. After an hour, Lily fell asleep on the conference room couch, exhausted from a week of school and the quiet comfort of being near her father. Diana and Marcus worked in silence, the only sound the soft rhythm of the child's breathing and the occasional rustle of documents. Marcus's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "Thank you for letting her be here. She's wonderful. You're doing something right. Most days I'm just trying not to do everything wrong." He paused, then added, "Her mother would have been better at this. Sarah knew how to make life feel like adventure instead of survival." It was the most he'd said about his wife, and Diana understood she was being trusted with something precious. "Lily seems pretty adventurous to me. Happy, loved. Those are the important things. You sound like you know something about it." Diana surprised herself by answering honestly, "I know what it's like to grow up with a parent who valued success over happiness. My father measured love in quarterly results and considered warmth a weakness. Lily won't have that problem." "No," Marcus agreed, "she won't." They worked another hour before Lily woke, yawning and disoriented. Marcus packed up their things, but at the door, Lily turned back. "Can I come again sometime? This is better than staying home alone." "You stay home alone?" Diana's voice was sharper than she intended. "Only when Dad has to work all 3 jobs and the sitter cancels. I'm very responsible." Marcus's face carried the shame of every parent forced to make impossible choices. "I check on her every 2 hours. She knows all the emergency procedures. It's not ideal, but—" Diana cut him off. "Bring her here. When you need to. Better she's here with you than home alone." "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling you. This office is empty most weekends anyway. Might as well have someone in it who appreciates the view." After they left, Diana stood at her window and watched them cross the plaza below, Marcus's hand on his daughter's shoulder, Lily chattering about something that made her father smile. The ache in Diana's chest was unfamiliar, something like longing mixed with recognition of what she'd sacrificed to build her empire of glass and steel. She'd chosen power over a connection so many times it had become reflex. But watching Marcus with Lily, seeing the richness of their small life, she wondered if winning had made her poor in ways that mattered more than the balance sheet she'd been taught to worship. The question was dangerous enough that she pushed it away and returned to work, because work at least gave clear answers and measurable results, unlike the messy uncertainty of wanting things that couldn't be quantified or controlled. The late-night sessions continued, 3 times a week becoming 4, then 5. The work was genuine, the problems real, but somewhere in the 3rd month, the conversation started drifting past professional courtesy into something more personal. Diana told Marcus about the pressure of being Robert Mercer's daughter, of walking into rooms full of men who'd known her father and watching them calculate whether she'd inherited his genius or just his name. Marcus told her about Wharton, about believing in meritocracy and discovering too late that loyalty mattered more than competence, that the system wasn't designed to protect people who expose its flaws. He didn't talk about his wife yet, not directly, but Diana could see the shape of his grief in the way he checked his phone obsessively around 8:30 every night, making sure Lily had gone to bed safely, that she hadn't needed him while he was choosing work over presents. One Tuesday in late spring, working through projections for Q2, Diana asked the question she'd been avoiding. Why did you really leave finance? Marcus set down his pen with careful precision. I didn't leave, I was erased. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. Diana pushed. I read about Horizon Capital, the fraud case, the SEC investigation. Your name wasn't in any of the public documents. That's because Horizon's lawyers were very good at making sure names like mine disappeared, while names like theirs got quietly settled. His jaw was tight, the words coming out clipped and controlled. I'm not ready to tell that story yet. Maybe I never will be. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. It's fine. But his body language said it wasn't, said there were wounds that didn't heal just because time passed. And Diana backed off because she recognized the walls when someone built them high enough to feel safe behind. They worked in silence for another hour, the tension slowly dissolving into the familiar rhythm of analysis and solution. When Marcus finally left, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, you're nothing like your father. You didn't know him. I didn't have to. You look at spreadsheets and see real people's money, real lives that could be destroyed if you make wrong choices. That's not how men like Robert Mercer operated. After he was gone, Diana sat in the darkness of her office and wondered how Marcus knew so much about her father, why he'd chosen those specific words, what he wasn't saying beneath the careful compliments. The unease settled into her chest like smoke, invisible but suffocating. The sense that she was missing something obvious that would matter later when it was too late to prepare for the impact. The revelation came on a Thursday evening, buried in documents Diana had requested for a presentation on corporate governance. She was building a case study on fraud prevention, using Horizon Capital as the cautionary tale every business school would recognize. The advisory board membership was listed in the appendix, names and dates of service, dry facts that should have been meaningless. Robert Mercer, advisory board member, 2018 to 2020. Diana stared at her father's name, the dates clicking into place with sickening clarity. Marcus had worked at Horizon from 2016 to 2021, had discovered fraud and reported it, had been destroyed by the company's legal machine. Her father had been on the advisory board during those years, had signed off on restructuring plans and governance reviews, had his name attached to the same institution that had ruined the man currently sitting across from her. Marcus hadn't noticed yet, absorbed in his own analysis. Diana pulled up the full documents, scanning through board meeting minutes and strategic planning memos, finding her father's signature on page after page of decisions that should have protected investors and instead protected fraud. The nausea was immediate and physical. Her voice came out too sharp. Did you know about this? Marcus looked up, confused. Know about what? Diana turned her screen toward him, watching his face as he read the board roster. She saw the moment recognition hit, the way his entire body went still, the careful neutral expression that meant he was processing information he'd hoped to avoid. The words felt thick in her throat. My father was part of the company that destroyed you. You knew this. How long have you known? I found out 2 weeks ago. I was reviewing my old SEC filings and cross-referenced with public records. His voice was steady but quiet, the tone of someone delivering bad news they'd already made peace with. I don't know how much he knew. Maybe nothing. Board members can be window dressing, names on letterhead without real involvement. But his signature is on the restructuring documents, on the governance reviews that should have caught the fraud. Yes. Diana felt the floor tilt beneath her, the careful structure of her world cracking open to reveal rot underneath. And you didn't tell me? When exactly should I have told you? The first night? Hi, I'm Marcus. Your dead father maybe destroyed my life. Mind if I fix your derivatives model? His control slipped just enough to show anger beneath. I didn't want to lose this, whatever this is becoming. This. The word hung between them, heavy with implications neither had been willing to name. You're working for the daughter of a man who might have known about the fraud that killed your career, that killed your wife. She saw him flinch at the last part. Watch the careful walls he'd built start crumbling. Your father wasn't the architect. He was one name on a list, and he resigned 6 months before everything went public. Maybe he found out and tried to get out clean. Maybe it was just coincidence. I genuinely don't know. But you came here knowing the connection. You took this job knowing. I took this job because I needed work, and they were hiring. I stayed because... He stopped, caught himself before saying something that couldn't be unsaid. Diana stood, chair scraping against floor with violence that matched her feelings. Because what? Because you wanted revenge? Because destroying the daughter was second prize to destroying the father? Marcus stood too, his voice rising to match hers. Because you're not him. Because when I look at you, I don't see Robert Mercer. I see someone trying to do better. Someone who stopped an acquisition that would have laid off 300 people just to pump quarterly numbers. Someone who's nothing like the man whose name is on the building. How can you even look at me? He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gray threaded through his hair at the temples, the scar on his forehead she'd never asked about, the exhaustion that came from caring too much for too long. Because when I look at you, I see someone who could have become her father and chose not to. I see someone fighting against their own worst instincts every day. Same as me. His hand touched her cheek, gentle as a question she wasn't sure how to answer. Diana felt tears she'd held back for 5 years suddenly there, hot and unwelcome, all the loneliness and pressure, and years of proving she was worthy of a legacy that had been built on lies. The words came out broken. I'm sorry, for everything you lost, for being part of... You're not part of it. You're what comes after. And maybe that's what matters. Then he was kissing her, or she was kissing him, and it didn't matter who moved first because they were both reaching for the same thing. Forgiveness, connection, proof that something good could grow from the ruins of everything they'd lost. His hands were in her hair, hers clutching his shirt, and the kiss tasted like desperation and hope mixed together in proportions she couldn't measure. They pulled apart, breathing hard, the air between them charged with everything they'd been avoiding for 3 months. Reality crashed back in the sound of Lily's ringtone from Marcus's phone, the reminder that the world still existed beyond this moment. He answered, listened, his expression softening. No, baby, I'm still at work. Did you have a bad dream? A pause. I'll be home in an hour. Do you want to wait up, or should I wake you to say goodnight? Another pause. Okay, I love you too. Go back to sleep. After he hung up, the silence felt different, weighted with decisions neither of them knew how to make. Diana stepped back, putting professional distance between them. This is complicated. Everything worth having usually is. My board would crucify me if they knew. You're technically my employee. The optics alone, I know. And I'm the guy who got destroyed by powerful people before. Getting involved with someone who has power over my employment is probably the stupidest thing I could do. Diana met his eyes. So what do we do? Marcus considered, then gave her the truth she'd come to expect from him. I don't know, but I know I don't regret this, and I think you don't either. She didn't. That was the problem. She should have been calculating risk, measuring exposure, protecting herself from liability. Instead, she was standing in her office at midnight, lipstick smudged and heart racing, feeling alive for the first time in years. The smart thing would be to end it now, clean and professional, before anyone got hurt worse than they already were. But Diana had spent her whole life doing the smart thing, being the necessary thing, choosing power over happiness. So many times it had become her default setting. Maybe just once she could choose something else. Same conditions as before, she said finally. Your daughter comes first, always. And we're careful, discreet. I can't afford a scandal right now. Neither can I. And yes, Lily comes first. That's not negotiable. Then we figure this out as we go. Marcus nodded, picked up his notebook, started gathering his things. At the door, he turned back. Your father's involvement with Horizon. Whatever he knew or didn't know, that's his legacy to deal with, not yours. You're building something different. After he left, Diana pulled up her father's files again, reading through the documents with new eyes, looking for signs of what Robert Mercer had known and when. The emails were careful, legally vetted, nothing that would stand as proof in court. But between the lines, she could see him asking questions, pushing for transparency, getting answers that must have made him uncomfortable enough to resign. He'd known something. Maybe not everything, but enough. And he'd chosen to protect himself instead of the people being robbed. Had walked away quietly while men like Marcus tried to stop the bleeding and got destroyed for it. Diana closed the files and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. She looked like her father, had his eyes and his build and his ability to make hard decisions. But Marcus was right. She wasn't him. She'd inherited his empire but refused his ethics, had learned from his mistakes even if she hadn't known the full extent of them until tonight. The question was whether that would be enough when everything started falling apart, because in her experience, things always fell apart eventually. The only variable was how much you lost in the collapse. The morning after carried the weight of decisions made in darkness that looked different in daylight. Diana arrived at her office before 6, running on 3 hours of sleep and too much coffee. Her reflection in the elevator's polished steel, showing someone who'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Nina appeared with the usual espresso, took one look at her boss, and had the wisdom to ask no questions. Marcus texted at 7, "Can we talk tonight, after Lily's asleep?" Diana stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard, aware that every response was a choice that would lead somewhere she couldn't predict. Finally, Wayne, 8 p.m., my place this time. The risk of that invitation wasn't lost on her. Her penthouse in Tribeca was private in ways the office wasn't, intimate in ways that made everything more dangerous. But they needed to talk without the weight of Mercer Capital pressing down on every word. Needed to figure out what they were doing before it destroyed them both. Marcus showed up exactly on time, still in work clothes because he'd clocked in at the building and left early, trading his shift for this conversation. He stood in her doorway looking uncertain in ways he never did with spreadsheets, and Diana realized they were both terrified of whatever came next. She poured whiskey neither of them wanted, sat on opposite ends of her leather couch, the distance between them feeling both necessary and absurd after last night. His voice broke the silence first. "I need to know what this is, what we're doing." "I don't know. I've never—" Diana stopped, started again. "I don't do this. Relationships, complications. I haven't been on an actual date in 2 years because dating means vulnerability, and I can't afford that." "So what changed?" "You did. This did." She gestured between them, unable to articulate the shift that had happened without her permission. "I spent 5 years building walls so high nobody could touch me. You walked in wearing a janitor's uniform and knocked them down with compound interest formulas." Marcus's laugh was quiet, almost sad. "That's the saddest seduction story I've ever heard. I'm not good at this, at being soft, at wanting things that don't fit on quarterly reports. I'm not asking you to be soft. I'm asking if you want to try this, whatever this is, knowing it's complicated and risky and probably stupid." Diana met his eyes across the expensive whiskey. Neither of them was drinking. "Yes, I want to try, but carefully, discreetly. If Blackwood finds out, he'll use it against me. The board's already looking for reasons to question my judgment. Then we're careful. No public appearances, no office displays. You're my employer in every space that matters professionally." "And privately?" Marcus moved closer, closing the distance between them with deliberate intent. "Privately, I'd like to kiss you again, if that's allowed." It was. Diana leaned into him, tasting whiskey and risk and the particular sweetness of choosing something for herself instead of for the company. His hands were gentle on her face, his mouth patient in ways that suggested he understood rushing led to wreckage. When they pulled apart, she felt steadier than she had in months, grounded by someone who saw her completely and hadn't run yet. They agreed on rules that night. No sleepovers until Lily knew and approved. No mixing work and personal beyond the consulting arrangement already in place. No assumptions about futures neither of them could guarantee. It felt clinical and romantic simultaneously. Two people who'd been burned learning to handle fire with respect. 4 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Marcus consulted 3 nights weekly, occasionally bringing Lily when childcare collapsed. Diana found herself looking forward to those evenings with the girl, teaching her about markets and money in ways that made finance feel like puzzles instead of weapons. The work was productive, the company stabilizing, and for the first time in years, Diana came home to her empty penthouse feeling less alone. Then the news broke. The Financial Times ran the story on a Wednesday morning, above the fold where everyone would see it. Mercer Capital founder's role in Horizon scandal revealed. Robert Mercer's advisory position detailed with precision speculation about what he'd known, analysis of his resignation timing that made it look suspicious instead of honorable. The journalist had found documents Diana hadn't known existed, emails between her father and Horizon's CEO that danced around transparency without quite achieving it. Diana's phone exploded before she finished the article. Blackwood called twice, board members texted, shareholders demanded explanations. By noon, Mercer Capital's stock had dropped 8%, and by 2 p.m., she was sitting in an emergency session with her legal team trying to contain damage that felt uncontainable. Marcus texted once, "I'm so sorry. This isn't your fault." But it felt like her fault, felt like punishment for the sin of being Robert Mercer's daughter, for inheriting wealth built on foundations that couldn't withstand scrutiny. She didn't answer because she didn't know what to say, didn't know how to explain that shame had a weight that crushed regardless of whether you'd earned it. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later, proper notice given, protocol followed even as everyone knew this was an execution dressed as procedure. David Blackwood called it himself, his voice on the phone, carrying satisfaction he didn't bother hiding. The board needs to discuss the implications of your father's involvement for the company's reputation and your continued leadership. Diana understood threats when they were wrapped in corporate courtesy. Of course, I'll prepare a full briefing on separation of past governance from current operations. You do that. She had 14 days to build a defense against accusations she couldn't fully refute. Her father had been involved with Horizon. He had signed documents and attended meetings and lent his reputation to an institution running fraud complex enough to fool regulators. Whether he'd known the extent didn't matter to the court of public opinion, and public opinion moved markets more efficiently than any algorithm. Marcus showed up at her office the night the meeting was scheduled, his face carrying news he didn't want to deliver. He laid his phone on her desk, screen showing a gossip site she'd never heard of, paparazzi photo grainy but unmistakable. Diana and Marcus at a playground in Queens, Lily on the swings between them, all three smiling like a family that had earned their happiness. The headline made her stomach drop. Mercer CEO's secret romance with Janitor, conflict of interest, or desperate alliance. The article was worse. It detailed Marcus's history at Horizon, his whistleblower status, his current employment cleaning offices in the building where Diana made millions. It suggested manipulation in both directions, either Diana using Marcus for information or Marcus using Diana for revenge against the family that had destroyed him. Every sentence was carefully worded to avoid libel while implying the worst possible motives. Diana's voice came out hollow. How did they find us? Someone was following us. Someone who wanted this exact photo at this exact moment. Marcus's jaw was tight with controlled fury. This is Blackwood. Has to be. Timing's too perfect, right before the board meeting. He's trying to destroy both of us. He's succeeding. The next 48 hours were brutal. Anonymous board sources leaked to financial press, suggesting Marcus was using Diana, that she'd been compromised by an affair with someone who had every reason to hate her father's legacy. Mercer Capital's stock continued falling. Shareholders calling for accountability. Competitors circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. Marcus came to her office after midnight on the third day, determination in his expression mixed with something that looked like grief. I'm out. I'm done. Diana looked up from the damage control strategy she'd been drafting. What? This, us, the consulting arrangement. I'm quitting, effective immediately. You can't. I can and I am. I'm toxic to you. Everything I touch turns to. He stopped himself, the word hanging unspoken but understood. Claire died because I made the right choice at the wrong time. I won't watch you get destroyed because you tried to help me. Diana stood, the exhaustion of 72 hours without sleep making her movements sharp and unsteady. You don't get to make that decision alone. This isn't just your choice. You're about to lose your company because you're sleeping with the help. That's a sentence that ends careers, Diana. Yours specifically. I'm about to lose my company because David Blackwood is using my father's mistakes in our relationship as weapons. That's different. How? How is that different? Her voice rose to match his. Because I'm not my father. Because I'm not hiding or running or protecting myself at other people's expense. If they want to fight, I'll give them exactly that. Marcus moved closer, his presence filling the space between them with urgency. They'll destroy you. Blackwood has the board, has the media narrative, has every advantage. Then we go down swinging. I spent my whole life proving I wasn't weak. I'm not starting now. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Finally, Marcus's expression shifted from resignation to something harder, more calculated. If we're fighting, we fight smart. Blackwood pushed this board vote too fast, 2 weeks after the article dropped. He wants you gone before something comes out. What's something? I don't know, but people who rush usually have reasons worth discovering. They worked through the night, Dinah calling in James Chen, her CFO, and the only board member she fully trusted. Chen arrived at 2 a.m. with coffee and the kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought. Having worked with Diana long enough to see how she'd transformed her father's aggressive tactics into something resembling actual ethics. The three of them spread Horizon Capital documents across the conference table, looking for patterns in the chaos. Diana traced board membership rosters, while Marcus cross-referenced with SEC filings, and Chen pulled financial statements that should have been public but weren't. Somewhere around 4 a.m., Chen found it. Blackwood wasn't just on Horizon's board. He joined in March 2020, 2 months after your father resigned. Marcus leaned over to verify the dates. Robert Mercer served through January 2020. Blackwood came on right after, and he stayed through the entire scandal, through the SEC investigation, through the client lawsuits. He was there when it all burned down. Diana felt pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. My father found out something and got out. Blackwood stepped in to manage the cleanup, or the cover-up. We need more than speculation. Chen was already pulling up archived board minutes, corporate filings, anything that would show what Blackwood's actual role had been. Marcus picked up his phone, scrolling through contacts. I know someone, former Horizon employee who didn't burn me when everyone else did. If anyone knows what Blackwood was really doing there, it's him. The call happened at dawn, Marcus's voice low and careful as he explained what they needed. Diana watched him work, seeing the ghost of who he'd been before Horizon destroyed him, the analyst who'd been good enough to scare people with power. When he hung up, his expression carried grim satisfaction. Blackwood wasn't just on the board, he was the consultant who designed the offshore shell structure. The whole fraud architecture was his creation. Then why did everyone assume my father was the architect? Because Blackwood made sure Robert's name was on the early documents. He used your father as a decoy, someone prestigious enough that when things went south, investigators would focus on him instead of the person actually running the scheme. Diana's hands shook as she reached for coffee gone cold hours ago. My father was framed. Blackwood used him, and when Dad figured it out, he confronted Blackwood. That's what the emails were about, the ones asking for transparency. He knew something was wrong but couldn't prove it, so he resigned and tried to distance himself. 2 weeks later, he died of a massive heart attack. The words hung in the air, implications too dark to speak directly. Chen's voice was careful. You're not suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything. I'm observing that the timing is convenient. Robert threatens Blackwood in February 2020, resigns to avoid being implicated. March 20, he's dead. Blackwood takes his board seat. By the time the SEC investigation really heats up in 2021, the man who could have exposed him is safely buried. Diana felt the room tilt, grief and rage mixing into something that tasted like metal. He killed my father. You're saying David Blackwood murdered my father to cover up fraud. I'm saying the sequence of events raises questions, but we can't prove anything. Robert's death was ruled natural causes, no autopsy beyond standard procedure. Even if we're right, There's no evidence. Then we find evidence, or we make Blackwood incriminate himself. Marcus looked at her with something between admiration and fear. How? The same way he's been attacking me. We use his arrogance against him. But they built the plan as the sun came up over Manhattan, 3 people running on exhaustion and determination. Daniel Foster, the SEC investigator who'd been building the Horizon case for 4 years, agreed to meet them that afternoon. He confirmed what Marcus already knew. The investigation had stalled because they couldn't prove Blackwood's continued involvement after the initial fraud was exposed. Foster's voice carried the frustration of someone who'd gotten close but not close enough. We know he benefited. Shell companies linked to him received transfers after 21, well into the so-called cleanup period. But he's got lawyers smart enough to make everything look like legitimate consulting fees. Unless we get him on record admitting knowledge of ongoing fraud, we can't move. Diana made the decision without consulting Marcus or Chen, knowing they'd try to stop her. I'll wear a wire to the board meeting, confront him about my father, get him to say something incriminating. Diana, no. Marcus's protest was immediate. If he suspects, if he finds the device, you're done. Criminal charges for recording without consent, loss of all credibility. I don't care. You taught me something about truth. Sometimes it costs everything, but it's still the only thing worth having. The words settled between them, Marcus recognizing his own philosophy being used against his protective instincts. Finally, he nodded, but his expression carried the weight of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. They spent the next week gathering every piece of documentation they could find. Marcus reached back into his network, calling in favors from people who'd stayed loyal despite the risk. Chen worked his Wall Street connections, finding analysts who'd studied Horizon's collapse and had theories about where the money really went. Diana prepared her presentation, building a case that would at minimum raise questions, at maximum destroy Blackwood completely. The night before the board meeting, Marcus came to her penthouse. They didn't talk about strategy or evidence or the 100 ways tomorrow could go wrong. Instead, he told her about Sarah, really told her, giving Diana the full story he'd been holding back for months. His voice was quiet but steady. We met at Wharton. She was studying social work while I was learning how to make rich people richer. She used to joke that we balanced each other out, my numbers and her humanity. When Horizon blew up, when I got blacklisted, she never once suggested I should have kept quiet. She was proud of me for trying to stop them. Even when it cost everything? Especially then. Sarah believed integrity mattered more than comfort. She got 2 jobs to keep us afloat, worked herself into exhaustion, while I fought lawyers who made more in an hour than we made in a month. Her heart condition wasn't serious, just something to monitor. But monitoring requires health insurance, and we'd lost ours. The medication was expensive, the checkups expensive, everything expensive, when you're poor in a city designed for wealth. Diana reached for his hand, the only comfort she could offer for pain that couldn't be fixed. You don't have to. I want you to understand, the night she died, I was in a deposition. Horizon's lawyers grilling me about my motives, suggesting I was mentally unstable, financially desperate, willing to lie for a settlement. My phone rang and I ignored it because they'd trained me not to break for anything. When I finally checked, there were 14 missed calls from the hospital. By the time I got there, she'd been gone for 2 hours. Marcus. Lily was at a neighbor's house, 4 years old, waiting for her mom to come home, and I had to explain that mom wasn't coming back, that daddy's choice to tell the truth had killed her. His voice cracked on the last words, and Diana pulled him close, holding someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. They sat like that for a long time, the New York skyline glittering outside her windows, neither of them speaking because some grief was too big for language. Eventually, Marcus pulled back, wiping his eyes with the kind of embarrassment men learn when vulnerability is treated as weakness. I'm telling you this because tomorrow's dangerous. If it goes wrong, I need you to know the stakes. I've already lost the person I loved most in the world. I'm not losing you too. You won't. We're in this together. Equal partners. Promise me something. If it falls apart, if Blackwood wins, you walk away and rebuild. Don't let this destroy you the way it destroyed me. Diana kissed him instead of promising, because she couldn't promise something they both knew was a lie. If tomorrow went wrong, she'd fight until there was nothing left to fight with, because Robert Mercer's daughter didn't know how to surrender, even when surrender was wise. The boardroom filled by 9 a.m., 12 members present, along with legal counsel and selected shareholders. Diana walked in wearing a black suit and the wire that felt like betrayal and justice simultaneously. Marcus waited outside, not allowed in but present, his steady faith the only thing keeping her spine straight. David Blackwood called the meeting to order, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd already won. "We're here to vote on the removal of Diana Mercer as CEO of Mercer Capital Group, citing conflicts of interest and reputational damage stemming from her father's involvement in the Horizon Capital scandal and her inappropriate relationship with a former whistleblower currently employed in custodial services." The words stung because they were designed to, each one carefully chosen to diminish and humiliate. Diana kept her face neutral, her hands steady on the folder containing evidence that would either save or destroy her. Before Blackwood could continue, she spoke. "Before we vote, I have information relevant to this board's governance and decision-making. This isn't a trial, Diana. No, it's a board meeting, and I have documentation that directly impacts our fiduciary duties and this company's leadership." She pulled up her presentation, 20 minutes of forensic analysis showing Blackwood's role in Horizon's fraud structure. Board members shifted uncomfortably as the evidence accumulated, the picture becoming clear even to those who'd rather not see it. Robert Mercer's name appeared in early documents, but the actual offshore architecture bore Blackwood's digital signature, his consulting firm's fingerprints, his accounts receiving ongoing payments long after the supposed cleanup. Blackwood's face went from confident to furious as the presentation continued. "This is desperate fiction from someone who knows she's losing. Your father's signature is on the restructuring documents, not mine, because you forged his approval on documents created after he resigned. The metadata shows these files were generated in July 2020, 3 months after he left the board." James Chen stood, adding his weight to Diana's accusations. "I've had our forensics team verify the digital signatures. These documents were backdated to implicate Robert Mercer while absolving the actual architect of the fraud." The room erupted in arguments and denials, board members choosing sides, legal counsel attempting to regain control. Through the chaos, Diana watched Blackwood, saw him calculating, saw the moment he decided his best defense was offense. His voice cut through the noise, sharp and cold. "You're implying what exactly? That I framed your father? That I somehow orchestrated a complex fraud and pinned it on a man with far more resources and connections than I had?" Diana leaned forward, the wire pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. "I'm saying my father confronted you in February 2020. He found evidence of the offshore structure and demanded transparency. 2 weeks later, he died of a massive heart attack. Convenient timing for someone who needed him silenced." The room went absolutely silent. Blackwood's face cycled through shock, rage, and calculation before settling on contempt. "You're accusing me of murder? That's psychotic desperation. Your father was a coward who took his secrets to the grave. If he'd had any actual proof, he'd still be alive to—" He stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Diana saw the moment Blackwood realized what he'd said, how it sounded, the implication that couldn't be unsaid. If Robert had proof, he'd still be alive. The conditional statement that assumed Blackwood knew what Robert had possessed, knew he was a threat, knew his continued existence was a problem. The doors opened. Daniel Foster walked in with 2 federal agents, badges visible, the kind of presence that changed everything. "David Blackwood, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, obstruction of justice, and wire fraud." Blackwood lunged to his feet. "This is absurd. I haven't." "We have 4 years of evidence, Mr. Blackwood, including recordings from this meeting where you just implied knowledge of Robert Mercer's proof and suggested his death was convenient. You might want to stop talking now." As they led Blackwood out in handcuffs, he turned back to Diana with hatred sharp enough to cut. "You've destroyed this company, everything your father built." Diana's voice was steady, loud enough for every board member to hear. "No, I'm saving it from the people like you." After the doors closed, the remaining board members sat in stunned silence. Patricia Reeves, a member who'd been neutral until now, spoke first. Diana just exposed the man who actually committed the fraud we've been blaming her father for. I move that we vote to retain her as CEO and formally apologize for this persecution. The vote was 9-2, Blackwood's closest allies abstaining rather than supporting Diana, but unwilling to go down with him. It wasn't the landslide she'd hoped for, but it was enough. She'd survived, had won, had proven her father wasn't the monster history was making him out to be. Marcus was waiting in the hallway when she emerged, and the relief on his face was worth every risk she'd taken. He didn't ask how it went, could read the answer in her expression, in the way she walked toward him without the weight that had been crushing her for weeks. His arms came around her, solid and safe. You did it. We did it. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd gambled everything and somehow won. But as they walked toward the elevator, Marcus's phone buzzed with an email notification. Diana felt him tense against her, saw his hand shake slightly as he read whatever message had arrived. His voice was carefully controlled. SEC wants my full testimony, complete deposition about Horizon, about what I knew and when, about Claire. Diana understood immediately. Winning today meant reliving the worst moment of his life in front of lawyers and investigators who would dissect his grief looking for inconsistencies. It meant opening wounds that had barely begun to scar, facing the system that had failed him once, and asking it to believe him now. She took his hand, felt the tremor he was trying to hide. You don't have to do this alone. Not this time. I know, but it still terrifies me. They left Mercer Capital together, walking into sunlight that felt too bright after the darkness of the boardroom. Diana had saved her company and vindicated her father's memory. Marcus had helped bring down the man who'd destroyed his career and killed his wife, even if they couldn't prove the latter. By any measure, they'd won. But victories in their world always came with costs deferred, and as they walked through Manhattan's indifferent crowds, Diana wondered what price they'd have to pay for justice that had taken too long and cost too much. The aftermath of victory felt less like triumph and more like surviving a car crash, the adrenaline wearing off to reveal bruises that would take weeks to show their full damage. Diana spent the next 3 days in damage control, restructuring the company with surgical precision, cutting ties to ventures that couldn't withstand ethical scrutiny. Shareholders grumbled as profits dipped, but she'd learned from her father's mistakes that short-term losses were cheaper than long-term corruption. Marcus's SEC testimony was scheduled for the following Monday, and Diana watched him withdraw into himself as the date approached. He still came to her penthouse in the evenings, still held her like someone afraid of drowning, but the light that had been returning to his eyes dimmed with each passing day. On Saturday, she found him standing at her window at 3 a.m., staring at the city like it held answers he couldn't find. Her voice was soft in the darkness. You don't have to go through with this. Yes, I do. Foster needs my testimony to lock the case. Without it, Blackwood's lawyers will tear apart the circumstantial evidence and he'll walk on a technicality. But the cost! Marcus turned to face her, his expression carrying a weariness that went bone deep. The cost is already paid. Claire's already dead. Lily already grew up without her mother. All I can do now is make sure it meant something. The deposition lasted 7 hours. Diana waited outside the federal building, ignoring calls from the office, watching the minutes crawl past with the particular torture of helplessness. When Marcus finally emerged, his face was gray, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. She drove him home in silence because some pain was too big for comfort, and he sat in the passenger seat staring at nothing while tears ran down his face unchecked. At his apartment, Lily ran to greet them with the innocent enthusiasm of 8-year-olds who hadn't learned yet that the world broke people. Marcus caught her up in his arms, buried his face in her hair, and Diana saw his shoulders shake with sobs he'd been holding back for 7 hours of clinical questioning about the worst day of his life. She left them alone, walking home through Queens as the sun set, understanding that some spaces belonged only to father and daughter, that her presence in Marcus's life didn't give her access to every corner of his grief. But the walk felt longer than it should have, and by the time she reached her building, the fear had settled in her chest like a stone. They'd won the battle, but the war was eating Marcus alive, and she didn't know how to help someone who was drowning in trauma dressed as justice. For 3 days, Marcus didn't answer her calls. Nina reported that he'd requested a leave of absence from his custodial position, citing family emergency. Diana respected his space while fighting the urge to show up at his door, knowing he needed time to process what testifying had cost him, but terrified he'd decide the cost included her. On the fourth day, Lily called from Marcus's phone, her small voice carrying worry that children shouldn't have to feel. "Diana, Dad won't get out of bed. He just sleeps, and I don't know what to do." Diana was in Queens within 20 minutes using the spare key Marcus had given her for emergencies. She found him in his bedroom, curtains drawn against afternoon sun, the kind of depression that looked like giving up because fighting had finally broken something essential. Lily sat on the edge of his bed, her hand on his shoulder, trying to wake someone who'd already disappeared into a darkness she couldn't follow. Diana sent Lily to the living room with homework and sat where the girl had been, her hand replacing smaller fingers on Marcus's shoulder. "I'm here. You're not alone in this." His voice came out rough from disuse. "I thought I was past it. Thought I'd dealt with losing her." But sitting in that room answering questions about her medication schedule, about why we didn't take her to the ER sooner, about whether I'd considered her heart condition before deciding to blow the whistle, "They asked you that, whether you'd considered she might die. They asked if I understood the risks to my family when I chose to report the fraud. As if I killed her, as if choosing to do the right thing was the same as pulling the trigger." Diana felt rage burn through her helplessness, fury at a system that punished honesty and then interrogated the survivors about why they hadn't learned to lie better. But Marcus didn't need her anger, needed something she wasn't sure she knew how to give: unconditional presence without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. She stayed through the afternoon, making food neither of them ate, helping Lily with math homework while Marcus slept or pretended to sleep. When evening came, she prepared to leave. But Marcus appeared in the living room doorway, looking more present than he had in days. His voice was quiet but firm. "I can't work for you anymore." Diana felt the words hit like a physical blow. "Because of us? Or because you need to move on?" "Both. Being your employee while we're together creates exactly the kind of conflict Blackwood used against you. And I need to prove to myself that I'm more than the guy who got destroyed. I need to stand on my own again, not as your consultant or your charity case." "You were never a charity case." "I know, but I need to believe it myself. I need Lily to see her father as someone who's survived and rebuilt, not someone who's permanently broken." Diana understood even as it hurt, recognized the necessity of his choice, even as it felt like abandonment. "So what does this mean for us?" "It means I need to figure out who I am without your company or your salary or your protection. It means I love you, but I can't let that be the only thing holding me together." The words sat between them, honest and brutal and necessary. Lily watched from the couch, too smart not to understand that something important was shifting, that the adults were trying to figure out how to be whole people instead of just halves that fit together. Diana's throat was tight when she finally spoke. "Then do what you need to do. I'll be here when you're ready." "I know, that's what makes this possible." Marcus registered as an independent financial advisor the following week, taking on clients nobody else wanted: immigrants trying to understand American banking, single parents learning to budget on poverty wages, former inmates attempting to rebuild credit destroyed by incarceration. He worked from the tiny second bedroom of his apartment, charging fees people could actually afford, discovering that helping those with nothing felt more meaningful than managing millions for those who already had everything. He also started teaching evening classes at Queens Community College, financial literacy for adults who'd never learned the difference between APR and compound interest, who thought investment was a luxury for people born with advantages they'd never have. His students were janitors and dishwashers and home health aides, people working 60-hour weeks for survival wages, and teaching them how to spot predatory loans felt like fighting the same war that had destroyed him, just with different weapons. Diana saw him twice over the next month, brief coffee meetings where they updated each other on work and life with the careful politeness of people afraid to push too hard. He looked better, more solid somehow, carrying himself with the dignity of someone who'd rebuilt confidence through action instead of inheritance. She was proud of him, and terrified they were growing into people who didn't fit together anymore. That choosing himself meant choosing away from her. Mercer Capital stabilized through Diana's restructuring, ethical pivots attracting new investors even as old ones fled. She established the Robert Mercer Redemption Fund with a portion of company profits, dedicated to supporting whistleblowers and teaching financial literacy to those the system was designed to exploit. The first scholarship went to Lily Reed, a college fund that would mature when she turned 18. And when Diana told Marcus about it, his pride nearly broke under the weight of accepting help. His voice was thick when he finally responded, "I can't take charity, not even from you." It's not charity, it's investment in someone who deserves every opportunity her father can't afford to give her. And it's named after my father because he would have wanted to fix the damage he helped cause. You don't know that? No, but I choose to believe people can be better than their worst moments, same as you're trying to be. Marcus accepted because refusing meant hurting Lily more than it protected his pride, and fatherhood had taught him that some sacrifices mattered more than ego. But Diana saw the cost in his eyes, the way accepting proved he still needed her in ways that made independence feel incomplete. 2 months after their last real conversation, Diana appeared at the back of Marcus's evening class, sitting in fluorescent-lit institutional space, while he taught compound interest to 20 exhausted adults who'd worked full shifts before coming here to better themselves. She watched him transform strangers' fear into confidence with nothing but patience and honesty, saw the teacher he'd always been underneath the analyst costume Wall Street had made him wear. After his students left, Marcus packed up his materials with the deliberate slowness of someone who'd known she was there all along. "How long have you been coming?" "This was my first time. Nina told me where to find you." "Remind me to stop trusting assistants who like you better than they fear consequences." Diana moved to the front of the classroom, the institutional chairs and scarred desks reminding her that not all education happened in buildings named after robber barons. "I have an idea, if you're willing to hear it." Marcus waited, and Diana pulled out the folder she'd been carrying for weeks, detailed plans for something bigger than either of them separately. The Reed Mercer Foundation, nonprofit dedicated to financial literacy and whistleblower support. Your name first because, as you earned it, equitable partnership in every sense. "I don't have capital to contribute. You have something better. Credibility. When you teach, people listen because you lived the consequences of telling the truth. That's worth more than money." Marcus studied the plans, reading through curriculum proposals and funding structures, seeing his scattered work formalized into something institutional and permanent. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Why are you doing this?" "Because my father's money came from a corrupt system. I want to use it to dismantle that system, or at least give people tools to fight it. And I can't do that alone. I need someone who knows what it costs to challenge power. Someone who won't let the foundation become another weapon for people like Blackwood." "What if we fail? What if I let you down again?" Diana closed the distance between them, her hand finding his. "Then we fail honestly and try again. I'm tired of succeeding alone, Marcus. I'm tired of building empires that make me rich and miserable. I want to build something that matters, with someone who reminds me why it matters." The kiss was different from their first, less desperate, more rooted in choice than circumstance. They'd both had time to become themselves again, and coming back together felt like decision instead of destiny, which made it real in ways that passion alone could never achieve. Building the foundation took 3 months of paperwork and planning, finding space in a renovated building in Brooklyn that had been a warehouse before developers turned it into the kind of practical luxury that served communities instead of displacing them. Lily helped design the logo, 2 hands clasped in partnership, and her 8-year-old artistic vision was better than anything Diana's marketing team had proposed. The launch event was intentionally small, no press beyond local community papers, just the people who would actually use the foundation's services. Marcus taught the first class himself, 15 students, including 3 former Horizon victims, who'd found the foundation through targeted outreach to those who'd lost everything in the collapse. Diana watched from the doorway as Marcus welcomed them with the kind of humility that only came from shared suffering. "I'm not going to promise that learning finance will make you rich, but I can promise it will make you harder to exploit. Knowledge is power, not the power to control others, but the power to control your own future. One student raised her hand, an older woman whose eyes carried the particular exhaustion of surviving repeated betrayals. But the system is rigged. Banks lie, companies lie, even the teachers lie sometimes. What good is understanding when everyone's cheating? Marcus's smile was sad but genuine. You're right, they do. But when you understand how it works, you can spot the lies before they cost you everything. You can protect yourself, and maybe eventually, you can change it. The class ran 2 hours. Marcus patient with every question, never making anyone feel stupid for not knowing things the system had deliberately kept complicated. After the students left, one man stayed behind, weathered and careful, the kind of person who'd learned to expect disappointment. His voice shook when he spoke. Mr. Reed, I lost $400,000 in the Horizon collapse. My retirement fund, my daughter's college savings, everything I'd saved for 40 years of factory work. Marcus went still, the kind of freeze that came from bracing for blame that had become familiar as breathing. Diana stepped forward, ready to intervene, but the man continued. I wanted to thank you. The words didn't make sense. Marcus's face showed confusion mixed with something that looked like pain. Thank me? For trying to stop them. For sacrificing your career. Your wife. I spent years angry, hating everyone involved. Then I read about what you did, how they destroyed you for reporting the fraud. Someone fought for people like me. That matters. Marcus couldn't speak. The vindication he'd waited 4 years to receive finally arriving in a community college classroom from a stranger who'd lost everything. The tears came without permission, and Diana watched something break open in him. Grief and validation mixing into catharsis that should have come years ago. The man left quietly, understanding some gratitude was too heavy for conversation. Diana went to Marcus, found him sitting in a student desk built for someone half his size, crying with the abandon of someone who'd finally received permission to stop carrying guilt that wasn't his to bear. Her arms came around him from behind. You okay? His voice was broken, but somehow whole. I spent 3 years thinking Sarah died for nothing. That speaking up was pointless, that the system crushed me and nothing changed. And now, now you know it mattered, that her sacrifice meant something. How do I live with that? Knowing she'd be proud, but also knowing she's not here to see it? Diana had no answer except presence, holding someone who'd survived 2 months and was finally allowing himself to grieve properly. They sat like that until the janitor came to lock up, until Marcus pulled himself together enough to walk out into Brooklyn evening with something lighter in his expression than she'd seen since the day they met. That night at his apartment with Lily already asleep, Marcus laid out what he'd been afraid to say. I want to do this, really do this, full time, foundation, teaching, building something that outlasts us. And us, what does that look like? I don't know, but I know I love you, and I know I want Lily to grow up seeing that good people can build good things, even after the world tries to break them. Diana pulled him close, tasting possibility mixed with risk. Then we build it together, real partners in everything. Equal partners. No more employer-employee dynamics, no more power imbalances, just 2 people trying to make something worthwhile. Deal. 9 months passed in the hard work of turning vision into reality. The foundation expanded to 3 locations, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, serving 150 students across evening and weekend programs. Marcus taught most classes himself, recruiting other financial professionals who'd grown tired of optimizing wealth for people who already had too much. Diana managed funding and operations, discovering that running a nonprofit required different skills than running a corporation. That success, measured in lives changed, felt more satisfying than success measured in dollars accumulated. They moved in together, not Diana's penthouse, but a brownstone in Brooklyn they bought jointly, equal names on the deed. Lily got her own room, decorated with her artwork and science projects, and she called Diana by her first name because calling her Mom would have dishonored Claire's memory. But the 3 of them built something that felt like family anyway. Sunday mornings at the farmer's market, and Tuesday night pasta dinners becoming rituals that made the week navigable. Marcus still had nightmares sometimes, waking gasping from dreams where he arrived too late, where Claire died over and over in variations that all ended the same. But Diana learned to wake with him, to sit in darkness until the panic passed, to remind him that grief didn't have an expiration date, but neither did healing. Slowly, the nightmares came less frequently, and the mornings after became easier to face. The press noticed eventually, Forbes running a feature on Diana's transformation from Wall Street ice queen to non-profit champion. The New York Times profiling Marcus as the whistleblower who'd turned personal tragedy into public service. The attention was uncomfortable, both of them preferring the work to the publicity, but it brought donors and students and validation that what they were building mattered beyond their own need for redemption. On a Friday evening in early autumn, Diana came home to find Marcus and Lily at the kitchen table, the girl reading an essay she'd written for school while her father listened with the attention he gave everything she said. Diana poured wine she wouldn't drink and stood in the doorway, listening to Lily's 8-year-old wisdom about success. Her voice was clear and confident. Success isn't money or fame or having a big house. Success is going to sleep knowing you helped someone today. My dad lost everything and found something better. Diana gave up being scary to be happy. They taught me that falling down isn't failure. Staying down is. Marcus's eyes found Diana's across the kitchen, and the look that passed between them held everything they'd survived to get here. Lily had been 4 when her mother died, 8 now, and those years had contained enough grief for a lifetime. But she was growing up believing the world could be good because the adults in her life had refused to let cruelty make them cruel, had chosen to build instead of destroy, even when destruction would have been justified. Diana moved into the kitchen, sat at the table with them. "That's a perfect essay, Lily. Your teacher's going to love it." "Do you really think so? Dad says I use too many big words." Marcus smiled. "I said you use advanced vocabulary. That's different from too many words." "Advanced vocabulary is just big words wearing a suit." They laughed, easy and genuine, the kind of moment that looked simple from outside but was built on foundations of shared trauma, transformed into deliberate joy. After dinner, after Lily went to bed, Marcus and Diana stood at their bedroom window looking out at Brooklyn's more modest skyline, so different from the glass towers where they'd first collided. His voice was contemplative. "Do you miss it? The power, the corner office, making decisions that moved millions?" "Sometimes. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But I don't miss being alone in that office at 3 a.m. wondering if winning was worth what it cost to win. And now? Now I'm standing here with you, and our daughter is asleep down the hall, and tomorrow we're teaching people how to spot financial predators. That feels like winning in ways the old life never did." Marcus turned to face her fully. "Our daughter?" The words had slipped out naturally, but Diana didn't take them back. "If that's okay, I know I'm not her mother, will never be her mother, but she feels like mine anyway, in all the ways that matter. Sarah would have liked you, would have appreciated that you didn't try to replace her, that you let Lily remember her mother while also being someone Lily could count on. I learned from watching you. You never tried to make me forget my father's flaws, just helped me separate his mistakes from my identity. Figured I could do the same for Lily with her mom's memory." They stood together as the city lights blurred and sharpened with the hour. Two people who'd been broken, finding out that broken things could be reformed into something stronger than the original if you were willing to do the work. The foundation was growing, their relationship was solid, and for the first time in years, Diana felt like she'd built something that would matter after she was gone. The morning brought its own gifts, Lily bouncing into their room at dawn with the enthusiasm of children who hadn't learned that weekends were for sleeping. "Can we go to the foundation today? I want to help set up for tomorrow's class." Marcus groaned into his pillow. "It's Saturday. Normal people sleep until at least 7 on Saturdays." "But we're not normal people. We're people who change the world." Diana laughed, pulling the girl into bed between them. "We didn't change the world. We changed our corner of it. That's all anyone can do." "Then I want to help change more corners. The world has a lot of corners." Later at the Brooklyn location, Diana watched Marcus teach, while Lily organized materials with the seriousness of someone given important responsibility. The space was modest compared to the offices Diana had once commanded, but it felt fuller somehow, occupied by people who needed what it offered instead of people who took because taking was what power allowed. During the break, an older student approached Marcus, a man Diana recognized from the first class months ago. His hands were shaking as he pulled out a folder. I wanted to show you something. I took what you taught and started tracking my expenses, built a budget. Last month, I had enough left over to start saving. First time in 20 years I've had money that wasn't spoken for before I earned it. Marcus's smile was genuine, warm in ways Diana still marveled at after everything he had survived. That's excellent work. What are you saving for? My granddaughter's birthday. She wants this science kit, costs $60. Before, I would have put it on a credit card, paid interest until it cost me double. Now I'm saving $5 a week until I have enough to buy it outright. That's exactly how you build security. Small, consistent steps instead of big, desperate moves. After the student left, Diana moved beside Marcus. You're good at this, at making people believe they deserve better. Someone has to. The system's designed to convince them they deserve whatever scraps they get. Is that what Horizon taught you, that the system's designed to fail most people? Marcus's expression darkened briefly. Horizon taught me that the system works exactly as designed. It's just designed to benefit people like your father while grinding up people like that man who's saving $5 a week for his granddaughter. The fraud wasn't a bug. It was the feature working perfectly. Diana understood he wasn't attacking her, was sharing hard truths about the world they'd both profited from before learning its costs. She'd inherited her father's wealth and his company, had used both to build something better, but that didn't erase where the money came from originally or who'd been exploited to accumulate it. Her voice was quiet. Then we keep building alternatives. Keep teaching people how to protect themselves. It's not enough, but it's what we can do. Knowledge is power, Marcus echoed his own teaching, then added something new. Not power to control others, control. Power to control your own future. And maybe that's the only revolution that matters, teaching people they deserve agency in their own lives. They worked through the afternoon, Diana handling administrative tasks while Marcus finished his class. Lily drew pictures for the bulletin board, childish artwork among serious financial advice, creating a contrast that somehow worked. When evening came and they locked up, walking home through Brooklyn streets that had become familiar, Diana felt a particular satisfaction of exhaustion earned through meaningful work. That night, after Lily was asleep and they'd collapsed into bed still wearing their clothes, Marcus rolled to face her in the darkness. Thank you. For what? For not letting me stay destroyed. For building something that made surviving worthwhile. For loving my daughter like she's yours. Diana's throat was tight. I didn't do anything. You rebuilt yourself. No, I survived. You reminded me why survival was worth the effort. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in ways that would be uncomfortable by morning, but felt necessary now. Two people who'd learned that love was less about grand gestures and more about choosing each other through the grinding dailiness of actually living. The Foundation's one-year anniversary came on a Tuesday, marked with cake from the bodega and speeches from students who'd completed programs. Diana watched from the back as Marcus stood at the front, Lily beside him, explaining what they'd built and why it mattered. His voice carried across the room with the authority of someone who'd earned every word through experience. We started this foundation because the system failed us. It failed me when I tried to expose fraud. It failed the people who lost their savings when that fraud went unpunished. It failed everyone who believed that working hard and playing by rules would be enough. He paused, looking at the faces watching him. Immigrants and laborers and people scraping by in a city designed to exclude them. But we're not victims anymore. We're informed participants in our own financial futures. We know how compound interest works, how to spot predatory loans, how to build wealth even when the system doesn't want us to have any. That knowledge doesn't erase the injustice, but it gives us tools to fight back. Applause filled the space, genuine and earned. After the event ended and they were cleaning up, Lily asked the question Diana had been wondering herself. Dad, when you were sad about Mom, did you think you'd ever be happy again? Marcus knelt to his daughter's level, honest even when honesty was hard. No, I thought I'd just survive. That happiness was something Mom took with her when she left. But I was wrong. So you're happy now? I am. Not the same kind of happy as when Mom was alive, but real anyway. Different isn't worse, just different. Lily processed this with the seriousness of children who understood more than adults gave them credit for. I'm glad you're happy, and I think Mom would be too. That night in their Brooklyn brownstone that had become home in ways Diana's penthouse never managed, they sat together in the living room while city sounds filtered through windows they'd left open to autumn air. Lily was reading Marcus grading papers from his community college class, and Diana reviewing foundation financials that showed modest success in metrics that actually mattered. The domestic piece of it felt radical after years of chaos, and Diana understood that this was the real victory. Not the board meeting or the SEC testimony or even the foundation's impact, but the ordinary evening when three people who'd been shattered separately had fused into something whole enough to contain happiness alongside grief. Marcus looked up from his grading. What are you thinking about? How strange it is that the worst thing that happened to both of us led to the best thing. Your destruction at Horizon, my father's death, all of it was terrible and necessary somehow. I don't know if necessary is the right word, but maybe inevitable. Maybe we needed to lose everything to understand what mattered. Lily closed her book. That's too philosophical for Tuesday night. Can we order pizza? With mushrooms? Diana asked, knowing the answer. Mushrooms are a crime against pizza. Lily's response was automatic. This argument, one they had had dozens of times without ever resolving. Marcus laughed. Finally, something you two agree on. They ordered pizza without mushrooms, argued about movies until Lily fell asleep on the couch between them, and eventually carried her to bed before returning to their own room. In the darkness, Diana found Marcus's hand. Do you still have nightmares? Sometimes. But they're different now. Less about losing Claire and more about losing this. Losing you and Lily and everything we've built. You won't. We're in this together all the way through. Promise? Diana kissed him instead of answering, because some promises were too big for words and had to be lived instead of spoken. They'd both learned that the hard way, had both survived enough broken promises to know that actions mattered more than declarations. Tomorrow they'd wake early, walk Lily to school, spend the day teaching people how to build better futures from the wreckage of pasts that hadn't been fair. It was so small work in the grand scheme of institutional corruption, but it was their work, built on foundations of honesty instead of convenience, designed to help instead of harm. And if that wasn't redemption exactly, it was close enough to feel like winning. Part 3 complete. Word count 5,497.